All right. And can everyone see my screen split between the personal project and TLDraw? Awesome. So the goal here is to just demo one way to sort of like think through a personal project and do some of the upfront design. And the requirements for the personal project, and in fact, let me just go ahead and pull it up so we can look at it while we talk about it. And I'll do a little bit of explaining why they are what they are. So the personal project requirements, using a React front end, Django on the back end, whatever database you choose is pretty straightforward. We have given folks exceptions, like some folks have like built a game using like a Python library. So if you have something like that that you're really interested in, then we absolutely can discuss that. But using at least two third-party APIs, and this is really two third-party REST APIs, ideally, because that's just such a core skill. And implementing at least two CRUD resources and implementing user authentication and all these other requirements are more straightforward. But the reason in particular that we are really pushing people to lock down like what third-party APIs are you using and what are your two CRUD resources before project approval is because these are the two riskiest pieces, really, I think, of the project. Because the third-party APIs are where you get your data from. And it's not uncommon to think, all right, I can use an API and then run into an issue or it doesn't get me the data I need. Or if I haven't locked down an API and I don't actually know where I'm getting the data for my app, that's just a huge risk factor before diving in and doing work on a relatively limited time frame of 2.5 weeks. And then the two CRUD resources, the goal here is to help you all think about what features is your project going to have, what features are most important, and what are my needs versus my wants. So this is both to help manage project scope and also lock down features and make sure that you've thought through it a bit so that you can dive in and get to work and already have an outline of what you want to do. So let me go ahead and write out a pitch, and then we can kind of see how we can spec these things out. So my pitch is, wouldn't it be great if we could write reviews of awesome meals that we've had and great restaurants that we've been to? And wouldn't it be great if we could see other people's reviews and see, what other people think of restaurants and see which restaurants have the best dish. So we can see reviews of the same dish for different restaurants. Now, I am cheating a little bit with my pitch because I've done this a lot. So I can, in some ways, jump straight into sort of thinking about what are the features of this product and how does that relate to APIs and stuff. But let's take this pitch and let's turn it into something more concrete. And I think we'll do this with creating a couple pages and a couple user stories, and then that will help us identify what are the CRUD resources here, what APIs do I need and how can I find them? And authentication is relatively straightforward, and maybe a little bit of the data model. So there's actually going to be a workshop that happens right before group workshops, and actually an optional Agile workshop that I'll talk more about probably tomorrow, that will talk more about this idea of a user story. And I'll share this link, but a user story is like one of the most popular ways of sort of like defining work for software projects. And the idea is it's an informal general explanation of a software feature written from the perspective of the end user or the customer. And the goal is to like articulate how this works for the user. And it should just be a couple sentences in plain language, and they don't go into detail. Once we have the stories, then we can add requirements. And there's a whole universe of stuff with this around Agile that you can learn about. But that's kind of like the most important thing. And the other benefit of stories is they can help us define our project. And the classic way to kind of come up with a user story is to say a user should be able to. Right? So, and this is where I could use some help from all of you. Based on this pitch, a user should be able to what? And feel free to throw things in the chat or just shut them out.
See people's other reviews on other restaurants.
Welcome.
Yeah, I'm gonna take that and make it a little more specific. See people's reviews of a restaurant. Awesome. And thank you, Cass. And someone else was saying something as well.
Yeah, they should be able to sign in so they can have a profile and we know it's a real user.
Yeah, totally. They should be able to sign up to create a profile, log into their account, etc. Awesome. Now, and in fact, you could even potentially break this into like different stories, but this is, I think, a good general one. What else should a user be able to do for restaurant food review app?
See which restaurants have the best dish and be able to compare it between the different restaurants.
You don't do nothing for Hashi.
Yes, and we have a hot mic. And
Hashi baby. Oh yeah, I walk him every time. We don't want to walk him no more.
Yeah. I'll be walking him.
He'll be walking him nowhere to the
let
door.
me
Toss him outside like a rat.
I actually cannot tell who has the hot mic right now.
Gatito de calle.
Jose.
Jose.
Turn it off.
Yeah. Okay. Jose, you've got a hot mic. Thank you, guys. I was looking there in the grid. Awesome. And actually, let me go ahead and just TAs, let me give you all co-hosts right now before I forget. And then we had a couple other good features to add to our list here. I was getting intrigued though, by the other conversation. I'm not gonna lie.
You want me to repeat what I said then?
Yes, please.
The users should be able to see what restaurants have the best dish and to be able to compare reviews of that same dish by different or by other users. Didn't phrase that well. Sorry, I'm tired.
No, this is good. And let's actually, this is a big one. So how can we actually break this up into maybe 2 separate stories?
Which restaurants have the best dish? And then to be able to take that dish and compare it by other user reviews for all restaurants. Basically, how you're searching is changed. One, you're doing it by looking for the best dish. The second one, you're doing a search by that dish, if that's the intent of what you're wanting here.
Yeah, exactly. And does this capture your intent, Cass? See what restaurants have the best dish and be able to see reviews of the same dish?
Correct.
Awesome. And thank you. And so what we did right there too, I think is one of the most important steps in kind of like writing user stories. And I think it comes a bit with practice. And this is also where the pages help, because when you kind of visually design a page, which we'll do in a minute for some of these, it sort of forces these things. But as you can see, like when you kind of have a user should be able to, and it's a bit broader, then that's a good signal. Hey, I can dig in and maybe break this into two separate stories. And these are awesome. Any other user stories that we want to add? A user should be able to.
A user should be able to create a review
Yeah.
for any of it to work.
Create a review of what?
Of
A
a
restaurant
dish.
and a dish?
Oh. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm actually gonna break those into two separate stories. And that in some ways, again, like I've just done this so long as a software engineer that I'm already sort of thinking in terms of features. But you can see how like be able to create reviews. Well, if we dig into this and we just say, hey, let's make this more specific, related to like what our pitch is and what our product is, then all of a sudden we get these two really nice, like clear, well-defined stories, and we can start seeing how these like map to features. And I think this is a really solid start, right? A user should be able to, and I think I'll maybe reorder this a bit. Sign up and create a profile, log into their account. They should be able to see people's reviews of a restaurant. They should be able to see which restaurants have the same dish, see reviews of, or see which restaurants have the best dish, see reviews of the same dish, be able to create a review of a restaurant and be able to create a review of a dish. So what jumps out to you all about these two stories?
They'd be sharing the same table.
They'd probably be sharing the same table. But if I'm able to see reviews of the same dish, that means, right, like, and maybe this is where going to the design stage will help. When I look at these two, what I see is, well, each of these dishes, like each review of a dish is probably from a specific restaurant, right? So where these two have some overlap. Which
Yeah.
restaurant has the best dish? How am I going to tell that? Probably by looking at all the different reviews of that dish. Tom, yes, sir.
I was gonna say it's definitely gonna be like a many-to-many relationship there, where like
Yeah.
you're gonna have multiple separate entities for like the dish, and then multiple separate restaurants, and you're gonna be able to sort them both by, quantitative values that people review them by, but they're gonna have associations to each other so that you can pull and say, okay, this is when you query and say like this is the highest rated dish. It's at, this specific, or this is the highest rated dish and it's found at X restaurant, instead of like trying to query it differently.
So this does clarify for me, because I was clearly not understanding what was meant by the crediting resource. I was thinking I had to go add another attribute to my project, when in fact you're basically a feature is what you're looking at. Is that an accurate statement, Adam?
Adam, you're muted.
Oh, thank you so much. Cass, I think what you're saying is really close. It's very similar to a feature. It's a little more specific because, you know, a credible resource, it means there's probably going to be a model that is associated with it. And there's
Correct.
probably going to be some API endpoints like specifically for that resource, like /dish or /restaurant. It does get a little fuzzy, and that might be something actually we need to refine and give a little more guidance on. And that's part of why I thought this would be useful as well. And Tom,
Thank
I
you.
think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying thank you and yes to your comment about further clarification.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tom, you made really good points about these two and sort of how we would implement them and digging into like parts that we could be adding to these features in terms of like filtering and sorting and stuff like that. All of which we'll get to. So this is awesome, and thank you, folks. So everyone, I think, finds like some people prefer to start visually, other people prefer to write stuff down, other people prefer to build out the data model in Draw SQL. So there's no wrong way to do it. Surprised I have to log in, but okay. And we'll call this restaurant food review app, and it's a Postgres app. We'll come back to it in a minute. I am a bit more used to kind of doing sort of like this user story or features exactly as you said and data modeling up front. But again, there's no wrong way. And the benefit of starting visually, like Francisco was saying the other day, is it does force us to think through a lot of what these features are. So I think that's the next step that we're going to do here. You know, we're already pretty close. We can see like a lot of these CRUD resources. Like we can probably make good guesses. And in fact, the next step may be thinking about what APIs do I need and looking for those. And if I was doing this on my own, I would probably dive into the APIs next, because making sure I can like find the restaurant information I need or whatever else. But I think it'll be really useful for us to kind of build out a couple pages based on these stories. And just as a refresher, so here's sort of the awesome diagram that Francisco shared of how to kind of go about designing, where we start with designing some pages and thinking about what each page is on our front end, and then break it down into components. And then we think about like what JSON do we need for each page, and then thinking about models. We don't need to worry too much about components yet, I think. And this JSON response step might be useful, but I think it's the pages that is actually going to be the most useful in thinking about what features are on each page. So let's make a couple pages. The sign up, let's skip sign up and login, because I think that one is more straightforward. Let's build out story number 2 to see people's reviews of a restaurant. And let me go ahead and call this restaurant reviews.jsx. So what are we going to want on this page where we can see people's reviews of a restaurant? Just at like a high level.
A list of the reviews and to be able to sort them in different ways. And
Yeah.
does this review, is this review one that contains a measurement, like number of stars, 1 through 5 as an example? Are you pulling from like Yelp or other sources of data?
Yeah, exactly. And this page, are we looking at reviews for a single restaurant or multiple restaurants?
This would be a single restaurant, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we'll have, maybe the restaurant name up here. And then exactly like you were saying, Cass, we'll have, like it's maybe review number 1, and it's by Alice. And we'll have review number 2 by Bob, by different users, right? And so I do want to point out, so we're making an assumption here, which I think is a good one, that we only want, logged in users to be able to add reviews. And so we can see right here, pretty much what we need. And we might have like filtering and sorting, and we might, we could very much add all those things, but this is sort of our minimum feature set, right? And based on what you've learned about REST APIs and designing routes and URLs, what URL, what path or route on the front end do you think this will have? Like if we're at HTTP, like restaurant dishreviews.com / what? And I'm just going to shorten this just to my app, just so it's shorter. Cass, yeah?
I was saying API is in there somewhere, but I was actually going back to look.
Yeah, so you raise a good point. We're definitely going to need to make an API request to our server. And we can think through that one. What API requests might we be making to get our restaurant data? Is it going to be a GET request, a POST request, a PUT request?
It's going to be a GET request.
Yeah. And we might have API / what?
The version number, right?
Yeah, V1. And after that,
Would it be the name of the restaurant that we're trying to get information on?
close. We're gonna definitely need to have the name of the restaurant, or maybe its ID. With the sort of REST API pattern, we lead with the name of the resource, and then the specific information for the individual restaurant, right? So it might be like restaurant or restaurants / and then exactly like you were saying, name.
So like string and then name. And you might
And maybe we
actually,
do reviews. Sorry,
yeah,
is that what you were gonna say?
I was headed that direction.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's other things we might do with a restaurant, right? If I want to post the review, it might be API / V1 / restaurants / name with a post request. And so sort of the pattern with REST API is you go from the greater to the smaller, right? Like the restaurant resource, and here is the specific restaurant I'm interested in, and then let me get all reviews for that restaurant. And then in our front end React app, like what is the user going to maybe put in the URL bar? What's going in like router JSX for this path? Is it going to be homepage? Not a trick question. right? It's probably going to be something like reviews slash back maybe restaurant slash name, right? Because maybe what we want is, and this would be a design decision. Like when I go to the page for a restaurant, do I want to see the reviews? Do I want that on a different route? But here I could then, you know, do myapp.com slash, you know, restaurant slash McDonald's. And then I see all the reviews for McDonald's. There's a lot of features we could add on here. Because we have dishes as well. For instance, like we could possibly filter by dish, right? Which opens up some interesting territory. But if we just pause here and see what we've got, just with this one story, we have some routes. We know that a restaurant is going to be a credible resource, right? Because we're going to want to be able to add reviews or create reviews. And I can even build out a little bit of my data model. I know that there will be, you know, the user, and I know that I will probably need a restaurant, and I will probably need a review. Or maybe what I want to do is maybe this is called restaurant review, and maybe we have a table named dish review as well. And that would be a decision that we could get to later. And we can kind of go through this in a bit if we want. But we can already kind of start to see the models that we'll need, right? Because what's the relationship between a restaurant and a restaurant review if we have like a separate restaurant review table?
I would have the restaurant ID linked to the review table, and it would be a one-to-many relationship, if I'm understanding that correctly.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just even thinking on the level of if it's one-to-one or one-to-many and so on. So I've got a restaurant, you know, I've got a restaurant review. There's actually a lot of interesting questions here, like when we have dish reviews, how does it relate to restaurants and stuff like that? And we can dig into that in a minute. But to kind of go back to our spec here, we've already identified one credible resource, possibly two, right? Create, read, update, destroy, restaurant reviews. So my next question is, how do we get the list of restaurants like into our application? How does that work? Is like, can I only make a review for a restaurant if it's in there? Can I add a new restaurant? How do you all think that should work?
I would bring up the option. So if this were me, I would want to add the restaurant, and I would need to have a search. Let me back up. So we would need to have a table of restaurants and actually check that table to see if the restaurant exists. and if it does not, we'll need to add it. And if I were to go further with that, I would probably first want to make certain that the restaurant is a valid one, because we can't just, so if somebody's trying to search on a new restaurant, they might misspell it, or they might put in only part of the name. We don't want dirty data being added to our database. So the question I have not answered for myself is, how would you make sure that you're not adding bad data for the same restaurant?
Yeah,
Just
those, I think you raise an excellent point there. And let me go ahead and make this font size a bit smaller. And so we can also, I'm sure there's a way to sort of write this user story under should, but sometimes I think it's easy to kind of say user should not be able to create a review for a restaurant that does not exist.
for the scope in this situation and in our short time frame, that would be the easiest, I would think.
Yeah. And I also hear you saying that, hey, like it'd be great if we could see basic information about the restaurant, like address and phone number and so on.
Owner, maybe even chef, if it's a 5-star restaurant and you like to follow a chef, but that's that is probably more like a nice to have than a need to have.
Yeah, totally.
The,
I
the
think
chef thing.
I think that could be awesome, and it could go under stretch goals. There could even be ways for like users to add that information if we wanted. But and the only reason I'm not including those right now is just to focus on the minimum feature set. I think those are all actually really good ideas. So this is actually really helpful because I need to think about where am I going to get this information about the restaurant? How do I make sure that the restaurant exists? And as you pointed out, we're going to have a restaurant table, and you know, when a user adds a review for a new restaurant that isn't in there, it's going to be added to like the database of existing restaurants. When a review is added for a new restaurant, that restaurant gets added to our DB. Right? So at this point, so we haven't even gotten into dishes. And there's a lot of interesting things that'll happen, I think, like, should a restaurant review always be of a specific dish? We very well might want to make that decision. But at this point, I feel like I have enough information to start thinking about APIs, because I know that I want some restaurant data, right? And like lists of restaurants. And I want to be able to like see if the name of a restaurant is a real restaurant. So like I would start by poking around to see if there is a restaurant API. Interesting. This is from Postman. So this one, I do not know what the heck Food Puka is. And if anyone knows of restaurant APIs, so this looks like it might be a good start. Find Puka. So there's the options start to expand. If I'm looking at all of these, I see Fork and Spoon looks interesting. Restaurants in the US. I think I'm going to focus on the US, or not worry about if I find a good API, I'm not going to worry about if it's not worldwide, just to get the ball rolling. Like TripAdvisor could be interesting. I just want to find an API that that works. There's also Google Maps. So, in terms of kind of what's easiest, let's see how sort by relevance. Let's see, do they have like user ratings? The fork, the
That's
spoon.
actually,
Oh yeah, sorry, Cassandra.
I was gonna say, actually, the credibility of your users who are posting is another probably stretch goal, because without some boundaries, then you can have a user go in and just set a bunch of negative reviews for the sake of being a PETA.
Yeah, that is a really good point. I would call that outside the scope of our minimum viable product. But
Yeah.
I absolutely agree. So I'm seeing a couple options here. The fork, the spoon by API Dojo. I don't really know where these APIs from Rapid API come from, to be honest, which makes me a little nervous.
I was
TripAdvisor,
reading reviews. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say TripAdvisor, just because that's a big company. That one I'm a bit more interested in because it feels like it might be like useful and reliable. So let's look at the TripAdvisor API and go to their site for developers and see if we can find restaurant information here.
I was gonna say Rapid API. I went and read reviews, and it often drew people in with what looked like good APIs, but then they would get charged, and then there were so essentially the reviews on Rapid API, the site, were very negative when I did a search on that.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag, I think.
Yeah.
TripAdvisor, I'm cautiously optimistic about. So the first question I have here is, can I create an API key and have it be free? And so it wants me to sign in. And so I want to see, can I even use this thing for free? So here we go. They kind of hide it here, but requests 0 to 5,000 requests per month. The cost is 0. So there is indeed a free tier. So it looks like they're going to require billing information, but that there's a free tier that I can use. And I can kind of confirm that if I go back into their API docs and I search around, maybe if they talk about pricing. So I'm not seeing anything else. So I'm going to trust what I saw before, that I think that would work. So I would probably move forward with this API. The next thing I would do is I would sign up, I'd create an account, I'd give them my billing information, but make sure that I'm not going to be spending any money. And then I would start looking through the API to make sure I can, like, say, look up a restaurant by name. Because that's how the users are going to use this, right? They're going to add a review for a restaurant. They're going to add the name of the restaurant. And we're probably going to want to look that restaurant's name up on TripAdvisor to see if we can get more information about it. Or get a list of restaurants. So I do see restaurants here as a category, which is a good sign. if we could try this out, it would be great. So this one takes a little more work to dig into. Like if I was doing this for real, I would probably spend a little more time playing around with this. And they want us to have the API key first, and I don't want to go through adding my billing information at the moment. But from looking at this, I'm getting confidence that I can look for a restaurant name, because there's this term search query, text to use for searching based on the name of the location, and there's category, and then they explicitly say restaurants. So I feel like there's a reasonable guess here that I can use this to look up and see if TripAdvisor has a restaurant or not. And if I look at this response here, I see it sends back information about the location, the name of the location, distance, which we don't really care about, an address object, and so on. So just as like a rough guess, I'm gonna say that this works. Use the TripAdvisor API to look up a restaurant by name to get info about it and confirm it exists. So again, like if this was my actual project, I would actually use it a bit more to make sure it works, but I think this is a reasonable guess. And what we can do is something like when the user adds a review, maybe we make a call to the TripAdvisor API to see if it has that restaurant in the list or not. Any other thoughts about like what other APIs might be useful for the features that we've spec'd out this far?
An API that has food dishes. Like,
If we-
what is it?
You mean like the name of different foods?
Correct, yeah. At a high level, not going into like detailed recipes or any of that, but if I'm wanting to see a specific, I don't know, Italian dish, or if I hear a name and I want to go see what it is, then having a list of that might be another way to pull in data.
That's an interesting point. I think we could go either way, to be honest. Like, I think we could just have users add the names of dishes and then we build up the different names of dishes in our database. Because I'm honestly just a little skeptical that there will be an API out there with like all the different kinds of dishes in the world.
True.
Though apparently Spoonful has some sort of ridiculous API here that now that I'm looking at this, but I don't know a lot about this. They do have a free tier, which is interesting. So we can see what's here in the Spoonful API. We can maybe go to their docs. So they do have a recipe search. To get information about recipes. There's ingredients, products. So menu items is interesting, though this looks like it's going to be maybe more related to fast foods. So my only concern here would be if we end up limiting users, because what if there's a dish that's not in one of the APIs that we're using? But I think there's some interesting potential with that. You know, if I'm just sort of looking for an API to use, I think it could be interesting to use like that Spoontacular API to get information about the dish, even if we don't restrict, like, you can only add a dish if Spoontacular has it. We could say, hey, like, when a dish is added, we'll also show information about it from the Spoontacular API if it has it. So I might say, use the Spoontacular API to show nutrition and recipe information about a dish if Spoontacular has a recipe for that dish. So this is, I'm stretching this a bit to meet the project requirement of a second API, but this is reasonable and it's kind of in line with what we're doing. And this sort of does add another story here, which is be able to see information about a dish, maybe, nutrition info and ingredients. So this goal was not part of what my original vision was, but it's not too much of a stretch. And I now have a second API that looks pretty good, that I know has a free tier that I should be able to go ahead and use. And honestly, it sure looks like their API is pretty well documented and probably easy to work with, which looks great. So, if I find another API that works better, that's kind of gives me more of what I need, great. But this is a solid satisfaction of my requirements here with a minimum feature set. So I think the last piece here is we've got restaurant reviews. We actually now know that like users will create restaurants when they add a restaurant review of a new restaurant. So we actually have two CRUD resources here. There's actually a third and probably a fourth hiding in our user stories. So I have been going on for a bit, so I do want to check in with folks. We should probably take a break, but also I just wanted to see what people would be interested in doing next. So let me go ahead and actually pause the recording, and then we can talk about what we want to do after the break. All right, so we've actually gotten really far in designing a lot of the very literally named restaurant food review app. Right, we've gone from a pitch to some user stories that are starting to get more specific and that become easier to translate into features and pages. And we made a page where we're going to view all the reviews for a restaurant. And in fact, I should add to my design, we decided that we want to see some restaurant info as well. So, we'll probably have our list of reviews here. But then we'll also have, restaurant info. So it'll probably look something. I'm just trying to keep things color coordinated. It'll look something like this. And in fact, I think that means I might end up making like 2 GET requests. It would depend how I design my API. But we want information about a restaurant and we want reviews. And actually to take a page from Francisco's book, if we go to see how he would sort of design JSON responses, that might be something that's useful to do for our restaurant page here. That might help us think about the APIs. So let's move this stuff off to the side. And we'll come back to it in a minute. But let's actually quickly just talk through like what JSON data, what JSON data do we need? I think we'll make this blue and we'll call this JSON. And I'll make like one big rectangle around all this just for fun. So what JSON are we going to need? And can someone help me build this out for this restaurant page? I know that I'm going to want restaurant name. What else? I think what I'll do maybe is to make this a little easier. We'll put like the 1 curly bracket here. And then this can go here. What else will we need? What else will we need? What other data are we going to need to make this page come to life?
The dish that the restaurant is known for, or dishes.
Well,
Actually,
don't
that's gonna be
have
a
that-
relation. That's gonna be a relationship. Never mind.
yeah, I was going to say we don't have. I think so. The features that we are here, we need the restaurant name. We need restaurant info, which is probably going to be another object. And then what do I need for reviews? Well, that's going to end up being some sort of array of objects with information, things like dish, reviewer name, and maybe, review, we'll call it review body or review text, like the actual, I'll just call it review body. Dish name, reviewer name, review body. We might want more stuff in here, as you point out, Cassandra. Like it could be nice if we, depending on if we use IDs or not, we might want like the ID of the dish.
I would use IDs just for data integrity and
Yeah.
efficiency.
I would as well. We're gonna want reviewer ID, some user ID. And maybe there's a title or not, but then this is the main content of the review. And we're going to have a bunch of those objects. And this sort of gives us a rough outline of what our JSON needs to send back here. And so, you know, I know that I originally designed the API like this, but if we wanted to, we could, there's no reason that we can't change it so that this one endpoint here sends back everything that we need. And so I think that is kind of left as an exercise to you all, because there's a couple different ways to do this. I think both have value. Probably it makes sense to just have it be one API call for simplicity's sake. But I might want to, you know, limit the number of reviews. So it may be one or two API calls. The advantage of two is this might give me more control over like the number of reviews and stuff like that more easily. So there's a couple different options there. But we can see what we need to send back, and we have a couple options of how we want to design the routes, how to get it. And then if I go over here, I can start to see some of these relationships. What's the relationship between a user and restaurant reviews?
The reviews would need an author.
Yeah. One to many, exactly. And author, I think, actually is a good name. I'll just do like, I'll do author, and it's going to be unique because each review is only by one person. Though one person can have many reviews. So we have a one-to-many relationship here. And then this is also a one-to-many relationship, and that a restaurant can have a lot of reviews. Let's talk about dishes. Let's make a page. Let's talk about some of these dish-related features. So the user stuff we're not worrying about. We now can see reviews of a restaurant. I do have one question about these reviews, actually, and this is actually a design decision. What is each of these reviews of the restaurant as a whole, or of a specific dish at the restaurant?
You almost need both, but for the purposes of this exercise, I would be doing it by the dish
Yeah,
and the restaurant.
I agree. And I should have added that in here as well. And actually, we do have it over here, where it's going to be, hey, I've got a review. It's of a particular dish. So I think the next logical page to build is, I'm not so interested in creating a review of a restaurant. I think it's more these pages where we view stuff that help us like figure out like our data model and sort of core features. We want to be able to see reviews of the same dish, right? Of the same dish from many different restaurants. I'm going to add an example so that it's less confusing, because I can tell that I'm already getting confused. Example, view all reviews of hamburger from I think I'll just leave that there and we can actually build it out. So let's go ahead and build this out. And a lot of it's going to be similar to what we have in terms of building out the page. So I'm going to duplicate this and move it over a bit. Except it's not going to be restaurant name anymore, right? It's going to be dish name and dish info. And this will be dish review page.jsx. And instead of restaurants, this is probably going to be dishes. And then we're going to have the reviews. And here, instead of dish name, we'll want to know the name of the restaurant as well. And so on. And then here we're going to have to make some modifications to our JSON. And it looks like I may have lost some of my like curly brackets. So I'll just put one here and put one over there. So can someone help me build out the JSON that we need for the dish review page? So what JSON data do I need here for this React dish review page? Oh, did we lose Saul? Or how about Terrence?
Sorry, this is not something I'm super comfortable with, but I mean, would we want to get the name of the dish?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in some ways, the question, I think it's like, it's not quite a trick question, but it's probably more straightforward than it seems, because you're exactly on the right path. I need the dish name. I see that there's some dish info here, so we're probably going to want dish info, and that might be an object of stuff. And then what are we looking at for the JSON for these reviews? Like if you're thinking about JavaScript, are we looking at objects? Are we looking at arrays? Are we looking at strings? Like what's just a little bit of the shape of this data? And you can totally phone a friend if you want to.
Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't know the spotlight was still on me. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and phone a friend for that one. Sorry.
No worries.
Would the reviews be a list of nested objects where each object is a review with its information?
Yeah, you're totally on the right path there. Like we're gonna have a bunch of reviews, so it's gonna be like a list, or in JavaScript an array. And then each object is gonna have just kind of like before, there's probably a review ID. We're probably going to want the reviewer name. We need the restaurant name because the reviews come from different restaurants. And let me tab this out so it all looks nice. We need the review itself, right? The review body. And in fact, for the restaurant, we might want like the restaurant ID as well. So we have a choice here. And it's not a choice that locks us in, but we might end up with restaurant being another object that has, you know, maybe like the name and ID or something like that. And I'll just tab all this to get it on the same level. And we're gonna have, you know, a JSON object that looks something like this for each of these reviews. So this has taken us pretty far. And let's see if I just can't get this all. There we go. This has taken us pretty far. And this can maybe help me think a little bit about my tables and my models too, because we haven't tackled dishes yet, right? We have a user, we have a restaurant review, we have a restaurant. So we decided that a review should always be of a dish. So in fact, let me go ahead and name this just to review. And what tables can I add here to my data model that capture the intent that this review is not just for a specific restaurant, but for a specific dish at that restaurant?
The dish table?
Yeah, totally. And then what sort of relationship might we have between the dish table and the review table? One to one, one to many, many to one.
Would it be many to one because you can have many reviews on one particular dish, or yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. Right? Many reviews of one particular dish. Each review is only for one dish and not multiple dishes. So for review, I think what I'll do is I'll add here a column and we'll call it dish ID. And we'll say that it's unique and we'll connect it up to, if I can just get the little dots to do what I want, to dish. And this will then become exactly like you were saying, many to one. A dish can have many reviews. Each review is of a specific dish and for a specific restaurant. And so this actually introduces a couple more credible resources, right? Because I should just change this to reviews instead of restaurant reviews. I totally got this wrong earlier. We have reviews, we have restaurants, and then we have dishes. And I should have rephrased the second one, but we can say when a user creates a review of a dish that's not yet in our database, you know, a new entry or record for that dish is created. So, and this is actually kind of interesting And let me actually rephrase this one. For a restaurant that's not in our database, a new record for that restaurant is created. This is actually kind of interesting because users probably won't be deleting dishes or deleting restaurants, right? I wouldn't want a user to be able to delete a restaurant or delete a dish. So these actually may not be full CRUD resources. If I were approving my project, I would probably say it's okay, because even though each of these isn't a CRUD, reviews are a full CRUD, and you've got like 2 other resources that we're at least creating. But we can see that these are sort of the resources that we end up with, right? And we can tell already that we're going to have in Django a restaurant model and a review model and a dish model and the user. And each of these might even be a Django app, the way that we've seen Francisco sort of design these really nice limited focused Django apps for each sort of area of our application. And you know, in terms of HTTP requests, again, we have a couple options, but the API call might be something like let's put this in red. Maybe it's get API / v1 / dishes / and we might need to do it by ID. We could do it by name. The dish names might be kind of long. So we could make that decision. I'll put ID over here. And in fact, I'll add dish ID here just for completion's sake to our JSON. I do apologize that this is a bit messy, but hopefully people can sort of see that all of these are this one JSON object. And you know, if we wanted to think about not getting too many dishes, we might even say like limit equals 20, depending on if we needed to deal with that or pagination. But even that's honestly a stretch feature and not probably part of the MVP. So I would probably just stick with that. So now we have a little bit idea of the REST routes that we'll be creating for our dishes as well. So this is probably a good pausing point, because this was kind of the other piece that I wanted to get to. You know, authentication I didn't cover, but it's pretty straightforward in that users can create accounts, modify their username, etc. And you know, then you can only like modify a review that you created. So this is probably a good pausing point just to check in to see what questions folks have before we wrap up. If there's questions around this, or maybe parts of the API that you want, or the project that you want to dig in more, what's on people's minds?
I'm ready to just dig in and then probably have you review to make sure that I am meeting the requirements.
Awesome. Sounds good. Yeah, I hope this was useful. Thank you very much, folks. And let me go ahead and stop the